She was cornered, trembling as brutal debt collectors closed in, her worth reduced to the zeros in her bank account and the numbers on a scale. In pure desperation, she screamed for a savior. The man who answered wasn't a saint, he was the city's most ruthless kingpin. And his first words, "I'll be your husband." Penelope Gallagher was used to being invisible, except for the moments when being seen was a punishment. At 28, she had spent her entire life navigating a world that demanded women be small, quiet, and delicate. Penelope was none of those things. She was fat. Not thick, not chubby, in a socially acceptable, easily digestible way, but unapologetically, undeniably fat. For years, she had buried herself under oversized sweaters and a quiet demeanor, trying to apologize for the space she occupied. The one person who had ever made her feel like she was enough was Declan Ree. Declan, with his charming smile and promises of forever. Declan, who had proposed to her on a rainy Tuesday, making her believe that beneath her deep-seated insecurities, she was worthy of love. It was all a meticulously crafted lie. Declan hadn't loved her. He had loved her pristine credit score and her desperate, blind loyalty. When he vanished 3 weeks before their wedding, he didn't just leave a note. He left her with a stolen identity and a staggering $250,000 debt to the O'Malley Syndicate, the most vicious loan sharks in the city. Tonight, the debt had come due. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the neon-lit pavement of the warehouse district into a slick, blurry mirror. Penelope stumbled out the back door of the bakery where she worked a second shift, clutching her threadbare coat around her heavy, shivering frame. "Going somewhere, Penny?" The voice was gravelly, dripping with a terrifying kind of amusement. Penelope froze. Stepping out from the shadows of the alley were 2 men. One was tall and broad, the other wiry with a scarred jawline. They were O'Malley's collectors. I don't have it," Penelope stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I told you Declan took everything. I don't know where he is." The wiry man laughed, a harsh, scraping sound. "Declan's a ghost, sweetheart. But your name is on the paper. Mr. O'Malley doesn't care who pays, as long as the ledger is balanced." He took a step closer, his eyes raking over her full figure with blatant disgust. "Shame you ain't got the looks to work it off in one of his clubs. Going to take a lot of heavy labor to work off $250,000. Big girl." Tears pricked Penelope's eyes, a hot mix of terror and humiliation. She took a step back, her heel catching on the uneven cobblestone. "Please," she whispered, the rain pasting her dark hair to her cheeks. "I'll pay you $20 a week, 50. Whatever I can. Just give me time." "Time's up," the broad man grunted, lunging forward. His massive hand clamped around her upper arm, his grip bruising her flesh instantly. Adrenaline, pure and primal, surged through Penelope's veins. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she swung her heavy canvas tote bag, catching the man squarely in the face with a hard, metallic thud, her heavy baking thermos. He stumbled back with a curse, dropping his hold. Penelope ran. She didn't know where she was going. Her lungs burned, her thighs chafing beneath her wet skirt as she sprinted blindly down the alley, bursting out onto a narrow, upscale street. The collector's heavy boots pounded the pavement behind her. Up ahead, warm amber light spilled onto the sidewalk from the frosted glass doors of the Obsidian Room, an exclusive, members-only cigar lounge notorious for catering to the city's dark elite. It was her only chance. Penelope threw her weight against the heavy mahogany doors, practically tumbling into the dimly lit, smoke-scented foyer. She didn't stop at the shocked host's podium. She bypassed the main lounge, scrambling desperately down a velvet-lined hallway, desperate for a back exit or a place to hide. Instead, She burst through a pair of heavy double doors and stumbled right into the center of a private, soundproofed room. The silence that met her was deafening. The room was opulent, smelling of expensive bourbon and old money. Sitting at the head of a long leather booth was a man who seemed to suck all the air from the room. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that hugged a rigidly muscular frame. His hair was dark, threaded with premature silver at the temples, and his eyes a piercing, icy blue locked onto her instantly. This was Alessandro Moretti, the undisputed boss of the Moretti crime family. 4 armed men stood in the corners of the room, their hands instinctively dropping to their holstered weapons the moment she burst in. I'm sorry," Penelope gasped, clutching her chest, struggling to pull oxygen into her burning lungs. "Please, they're going to kill me." Before Alessandro could speak, the doors crashed open behind her. The 2 O'Malley collectors barged in, panting, their faces flushed with rage. "Listen here, you fat bee." The wiry man's words died in his throat. He looked up, finally registering who was sitting in the booth. All the color drained from his face. "Mr. Moretti," he squeaked, suddenly trembling. "Apologies. We didn't realize. We were just collecting a stray." Alessandro didn't look at the men. His icy gaze remained fixed on Penelope. He took in her soaked, disheveled state, the terror in her wide brown eyes, the heavy, soft curves of her body trembling beneath her ruined coat. You saw the angry red bruise blooming on her pale arm where the collector had grabbed her. "A stray," Alessandro repeated, his voice smooth, deep, and laced with a quiet, lethal danger. Penelope looked at him, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. Society had taught her to shrink, to apologize for existing. But in this moment of pure, unadulterated fear, she looked directly into the eyes of a monster and begged, "Help me, please. I'll do anything. I have nothing, but I'll do anything." Alessandro slowly reached for the crystal tumbler of bourbon on the table, took a measured sip, and set it down. He stood up. He was incredibly tall, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator. He walked around the table, stopping directly in front of Penelope. He was close enough that she could smell the bergamot and expensive tobacco clinging to him. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, shrugging it off his broad shoulders, and draped it over Penelope's trembling, soaked shoulders. The warmth of him enveloped her. Then Alessandro turned his icy stare to the O'Malley men. "You're in my establishment, bleeding onto my floors over a $250,000 debt," Alessandro said softly. "She owes Mr. O'Malley, sir. Her fiancé ran off." "I don't care," Alessandro interrupted, the temperature in the room dropping 10 degrees. "Go back to O'Malley. Tell him the $250,000 is cleared. I'll have the money wired to him by midnight." Penelope gasped, staring up at him in shock. The collectors looked utterly bewildered. "Sir? You're paying her debt? Why?" Alessandro looked down at Penelope, his large calloused hand reaching up to brush a wet strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was shockingly gentle, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "Because the woman is untouchable," Alessandro declared, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a king making a decree. "She's going to be my wife." Penelope woke up to the feeling of Egyptian cotton against her skin and the soft, steady patter of rain against a massive bay window. She blinked against the morning light, her mind struggling to bridge the gap between the terrifying alleyway and the luxurious, sprawling bedroom she now occupied. It wasn't a dream. The deep masculine scent of bergamot lingering on the pillows confirmed it. She sat up, pulling the thick duvet up to her chin. She was wearing a silk nightgown that surprisingly perfectly fit her plus-sized frame. How did he get this, she wondered, a blush creeping up her neck. A gentle knock preceded the opening of the door, An older woman with kind eyes and a stern, perfectly pinned bun walked in carrying a silver tray. "Good morning, Miss Gallagher. I am Beatrice, Mr. Dear Moretti's head of household. I brought you some chamomile tea and toast. Mr. Moretti requests your presence in his study when you are ready." "Thank you," Penelope said, her voice raspy. She looked down at herself, her deep insecurities clawing their way to the surface. "Beatrice, why am I here? A man like him. He doesn't want a woman like me." Beatrice offered a tight, sympathetic smile. "Mr. Moretti does nothing without a reason, child. And he is not a man who concerns himself with what other people think he should want. There are fresh clothes in the wardrobe. I suggest you don't keep him waiting." 20 minutes later, dressed in a beautifully tailored pair of high-waisted black trousers and an emerald silk blouse she had found waiting for her, Penelope stood before the heavy oak doors of the study. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. She was fat, she was broke, but she was no longer a victim. She pushed the doors open. Alessandro was seated behind a massive mahogany desk reviewing a stack of documents. In the daylight, he was even more intimidating. Strikingly handsome, but with hard, unforgiving lines etched around his mouth and eyes. "Sit, Penelope," he said, not looking up. She walked over and sank into one of the leather wingback chairs. "You bought my clothes," she said, breaking the silence. Alessandro finally looked up, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "I had Beatrice take your measurements while you slept. You arrived soaking wet and shivering. I prefer my guests comfortable." "I'm not a guest, am I?" she challenged quietly. "You bought my debt. You told those men I was going to be your wife." "Why?" Alessandro closed the folder in front of him and leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I am a businessman, Penelope. Currently, I am in line to take a seat on the commission, the governing body of the 5 families. The men who run it are old, traditional, and deeply suspicious. They view an unmarried boss as a liability, a wild card. To secure my seat, I need a wife. A stable, devoted, unquestionable wife." Penelope let out a harsh, self-deprecating laugh. "And you chose me? Look at me, Mr. Moretti. I'm a size 22 baker with a ruined credit score. Your world is full of supermodels and socialites who would kill to wear your ring. I am the punchline to a joke, not a Mafia Don's trophy wife." Alessandro's expression darkened. He stood up, walking slowly around the desk until he was standing right in front of her. He leaned against the edge of the wood, towering over her. "I despise the women in my world," Alessandro said, his voice a low rumble. "They are plastic, treacherous, and hollow. They would sell my secrets the moment a better offer came along. I watched you last night. I investigated you while you slept. You stayed in the city to try and pay off a debt that wasn't even yours out of some misplaced sense of honor to a man who betrayed you. You are loyal to a fault. That is a currency I value." He reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing the soft curve of her cheek. Penelope shivered, her breath catching in her throat. "As for your body," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her chest before slowly dragging back up to her eyes, heavy with an unapologetic, predatory heat. "Do not project the shallow insecurities of ordinary men onto me, Penelope. I do not want a fragile, starving bird I can break with 2 fingers. You are soft, you are substantial. You take up space in a room, and I like a woman who exists fully." Penelope felt a flush of heat wash over her entire body. No man had ever spoken to her like this. Declan had tolerated her weight, making backhanded compliments. Alessandro spoke about her size as if it were a demand, a feature that commanded respect and desire. "The arrangement is simple," Alessandro continued, stepping back and slipping back into his cold, businesslike demeanor. 1 year. We sign a legal contract. We marry, You live here under my protection. Your debts are permanently erased. I will ensure you want for nothing. And when the year is up, if you wish to leave, you will walk away with $5 million. Penelope stared at him, her mind racing. What do I have to do? Just pretend to be in love with you? You will stand by my side. You will attend the galas, the dinners. You will be fiercely loyal to the Moretti name. He paused, a dark shadow crossing his face. And you will act as bait. Penelope blinked. Bait? Bait? Your ex-fiancé, Declan Reed, Alessandro said, walking over to pour 2 glasses of sparkling water, handing her one. He didn't just borrow $250,000 from the O'Malleys. He used that money to bribe one of my lieutenants. Declan stole a ledger from my organization, a book containing the names of corrupt judges, politicians, and police captains on my payroll. He's trying to sell it to the Russians. Penelope's stomach dropped. Declan wasn't just a deadbeat. He was playing in the major leagues of organized crime. He set me up. He needed a distraction, Alessandro confirmed. He left you holding the bag with O'Malley so no one would look for him. But Declan is arrogant, and he's stupid. When word hits the streets tomorrow that the fat, pathetic ex-fiancé he abandoned has suddenly married the boss of the Moretti family, he won't be able to stay away. He'll think you manipulated your way into my vault. He will come looking for you. Penelope's hands trembled, the glass of water rattling against her rings. You want to use me to catch him. I want to use you to end him, Alessandro corrected, his voice devoid of mercy. He put a target on your back. He made you cry in the rain. I am offering you the ultimate revenge, Penelope. I will protect you with every gun in this city, and when Declan comes crawling back, I will deliver him to you. He held out a thick, leather-bound folder. The marriage contract. Penelope looked at the folder, then up at the beautiful, terrifying man offering her the world wrapped in a blood-soaked ribbon. She had spent her life shrinking, hiding, being trampled on. For the first time, someone was handing her a crown, even if it was made of thorns. She didn't hesitate. She reached across the desk, took the gold fountain pen he offered, and signed her name. Good girl, Alessandro whispered, his eyes flashing with a dangerous, possessive triumph. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Moretti. The next 4 weeks were a dizzying blur of wealth, power, and a strange, intoxicating domesticity. Penelope Gallagher, the girl who used to count pennies to afford generic brand flour, was now Mrs. Four. Penelope Moretti. Alessandro did not do things by halves to ensure their marriage looked entirely authentic to the ruling families of the Cosa Nostra. He wove Penelope into the very fabric of his empire. He assigned a security detail to her, led by a silent, hulking enforcer named Rocco. He brought her to his private tailor, an exclusive boutique hidden above Fifth Avenue, commanding them to create a wardrobe that highlighted her curves rather than hiding them. Do not drape her like a piece of furniture, Alessandro had coldly instructed a nervous seamstress one afternoon, his hand resting possessively on Penelope's plush hip. Cinch the waist, plunge the neckline. Let them see the woman who commands my attention. She saw a woman dripping in bespoke silks, wearing a staggering 4-carat emerald-cut diamond from Cartier on her left hand. But more importantly, she saw a woman who was no longer afraid. Alessandro's absolute, terrifying devotion was a shield. When a snide underboss wife muttered a cruel comment about Penelope's weight during a Sunday dinner at Tavern on the Green, Alessandro hadn't yelled. He had simply leaned across the table, smiled a dead-eyed smile, and informed the woman's husband that his shipping routes were permanently revoked. The room had fallen into a deathly respectful silence. No one dared disrespect the king's wife, but behind the closed doors of the Moretti estate, The lines of their contract were dangerously blurring. Alessandro was a man, obsessed. He didn't just tolerate her body, he worshipped it. He would spend evenings in the study, a glass of expensive Macallan 25 in his hand, just watching her read by the fire. Sometimes he would pull her onto his lap, burying his face in the soft crook of her neck, his large hands mapping the heavy curves of her thighs with a reverence that made Penelope's heart ache. She was falling in love with a monster, and the monster, she realized with a terrifying thrill, might just be falling for her. The trap for Declan was officially set during the annual Syndicate Gala, hosted at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. It was the most important night of the year, a dazzling display of criminal wealth, cloaked in high society glamour. Penelope wore a custom crimson gown that hugged every inch of her full figure, her dark hair cascading in vintage waves. She looked like a siren, a beacon of power and untouchable wealth. Exactly the kind of bait a desperate rat couldn't resist. The ballroom was a sea of tailored tuxedos and glittering jewels. Alessandro kept Penelope close, his hand a constant searing weight against the small of her back. The whispers followed them, a mix of awe and dangerous curiosity. The news had spread like wildfire. The untouchable Alessandra Moretti had taken a bride, and she was the ex-fiancée of a wanted man. At midnight, Alessandro leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. Rocco spotted him. He bribed a valet and slipped through the kitchen service elevators. "He's looking for you." Penelope's breath hitched. The ghost of her past was finally here. "Are you ready, Mia Regina?" Alessandro murmured, his eyes dark with the promise of violence. "Go to the East Corridor powder room. Rocco and I will be in the shadows." Penelope nodded, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She detached herself from Alessandro's side, excusing herself from a conversation with an aging mob boss, and glided toward the quiet, opulent hallway of the East Wing. The music from the ballroom faded into a muffled thrum. The hallway was lined with antique mirrors and gilded sconces, completely deserted. "Penny." The voice was a harsh, desperate hiss. Penelope stopped. Stepping out from an alcove near the powder room was Declan Reed. He looked terrible. The charming, polished man who had proposed to her was gone. In his place was a hollow-eyed, frantic shadow. His tuxedo was ill-fitting, his hair greasy, his face drawn with the paranoia of a man hunted by both the Russian mob and the Italian syndicate. "Declan," Penelope said, her voice surprisingly steady. She didn't feel the old, crushing weight of inadequacy. Looking at him now, she only felt pity and deep, biting anger. "Penny, thank God," Declan gasped, lunging forward to grab her hands, but Penelope took a sharp step back. He blinked, clearly thrown by her coldness. "You have to help me. I saw the papers. I saw you married Moretti. I don't know how you pulled this off, pulling a long con on a Mafia boss. But you hit the jackpot, Pen." "A long con," Penelope repeated, her voice dripping with ice. "You think I manipulated him?" "Don't play dumb with me, it's Declan," he urged, pacing frantically. "Look, the Russians are going to kill me. I still have Moretti's ledger, but I can't fence it. Nobody will touch it. You have to get me the code to his offshore accounts. Just 2 million. He won't even notice it's gone. You owe me, Penny. I'm the only one who ever gave a fat girl like you the time of day." Penelope felt a terrifying calm wash over her. For years she had believed his narrative. She had believed she was lucky to have crumbs of affection. "I owe you nothing," Penelope said, her voice echoing in the quiet hall. "You left me to be torn apart by loan sharks. You sold my life to save your own." Mo. Declan's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Don't act high and mighty with me, you stupid cow." You're going to go back to that ballroom. You're going to get his phone, and you're going to—" He reached into his jacket, pulling out a snub-nosed revolver, aiming it directly at her stomach. "I didn't want to do this, Penny, but I'm out of time. Drop the weapon, Declan, or the next breath you take will be through a hole in your throat." The voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute freezing weight of an avalanche. Declan froze, the color draining from his face as he slowly turned his head. Alessandro Moretti stepped out of the shadows of the alcove behind him. He wasn't holding a gun. He didn't need to. Behind him, blocking the only exit, stood Rocco and 3 other heavily armed enforcers. Moretti," Declan stammered, his hand shaking so violently the gun nearly slipped from his grip. I was just talking to her. She's my—" "Finish that sentence and I will remove your tongue," Alessandro purred, stalking forward with the lethal grace of a panther. "Drop it." Declan dropped the gun. It clattered uselessly onto the marble floor. He immediately fell to his knees, throwing his hands up. Wait! I have the ledger, the one with the judges and the cops. I'll give it back. Just let me walk away. I'll disappear. You can keep the fat ass crack." Alessandro moved faster than Penelope's eyes could track. His heavy, leather-clad shoe connected squarely with Declan's jaw. The sickening sound of bones splintering echoed down the hall as Declan collapsed into a heap, spitting blood and teeth onto the pristine marble. Alessandro stood over him, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo, his face an emotionless mask of terrifying brutality. "You stole from my organization. You insulted my wife. And you pointed a weapon at my queen." Alessandro gestured lazily to Rocco. "Take him to the warehouse by the docks. The O'Malley brothers have been asking about him. Tell them his debt is paid, but they can keep the man. And ensure the Russians know exactly where he is." Declan tried to scream, but only a gurgling sob escaped as Rocco and another enforcer hauled him up by his collar and dragged him down the service corridor. The ghost was banished. The rat was caught. Alessandro stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle over the hallway. Then he turned to Penelope. The cold, violent Mafia boss vanished, replaced by a man looking at his world. He closed the distance between them, his hands cupping her face. "Did he hurt you?" Alessandro demanded, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones, his icy blue eyes searching hers frantically. "No," Penelope breathed, her hands coming up to grip his wrists. "I'm okay, because of you." Later that night, the adrenaline of the gala faded, leaving a quiet intimacy in the master suite of the Moretti estate. The rain was drumming against the windows, a poetic echo of the night they had first met. Penelope sat at the edge of the sprawling bed, dressed in her silk nightgown. On the table next to her sat the leather-bound folder. The marriage contract. Alessandro emerged from the master bath clad only in a pair of dark sweatpants, the heavy scars on his muscular torso a testament to the violent life he led. He walked over and looked down at the folder. The ledger was recovered from the locker. "Declan hid it in," Alessandro stated, his voice quiet. "The threat is neutralized. My seat on the commission is secure. The parameters of our agreement have been fulfilled." Penelope felt a heavy stone drop in her stomach. This was it. The fairy tale was over. "So, I have my 5 million. I can go." She forced a smile, though tears burned the backs of her eyes. "I'm sure you have a real Mafia princess waiting in the wings." Alessandro didn't speak. He reached out, picked up the thick leather folder, and with one swift, violent motion tore the contract entirely in half. Then he tossed the pieces into the roaring fireplace. Penelope gasped as the flames consumed the paper. "What are you doing?" Alessandro dropped to his knees in front of her. He, the most feared man in the city, knelt before her, pressing his face into the soft, heavy curve of her stomach, his arms wrapping tightly around her waist. "I am destroying a lie," he murmured against her skin, the vibration sending shivers down her spine. He looked up, his icy eyes burning with a fierce, possessive fire. "There is no contract. There is no 1 year. I told you I wanted a wife, Penelope. I didn't tell you I was looking for a business partner." Tears finally spilled over Penelope's cheeks. "Alessandro, you are not leaving," he stated, his voice a low, desperate command. "You are my heart. You are my sanity. You walked into my life, took up every inch of space in my cold world, and made it warm. I don't want a fragile princess. I want you. Your fire, your loyalty, your magnificent body. Every single curve belongs to me, and my soul belongs to you." Penelope leaned down, threading her fingers through his dark hair, pulling his lips to hers. It wasn't a kiss of contract or obligation. It was a vow. Deep, bruising, and fiercely real. She had walked into the darkness begging for a savior, but instead she had found her king. And Penelope Moretti was finally, truly, ready to rule. Penelope's journey from a terrified victim to the unapologetic queen of the criminal underworld proves that true worth isn't measured by a dress size, but by the fire in your soul. Do you think Declan got what he deserved? If you loved